Hi, welcome to Political Science 101. I'm your professor, Lawson. This is the first time I'm teaching an online course where I'm going to try a video component, but I won't be doing it regularly, but every now and again. So welcome. Be sure to take care to read the syllabus, make sure you understand all the assignments and everything. If you have any questions, post it on the help board, and I'll try and be as responsive as possible and usually get to you within 24 hours. So, this morning I just want to give you a quick introduction to political science, and I think the best way to do that is to define first politics for you and then define what science is. Slap those two together and you've got a definition of political science. So the way that I typically arrange all of my lectures actually is by putting them into 3 points, and so you'll get used to lists of 3, very many of them. So we can do the same with politics, and if you look up politics in the dictionary, you'll notice that it's got almost a natural definition in the 3 parts. And if you look at the word's etymology, that is the root word from Latin, you'll notice that one of the first definitions of politics relates to the polis. So you've probably heard of some cities like Indianapolis or Annapolis, and the polis on the end refers basically to the idea of the state or the city-state. And back in ancient Greece, the city-state meant something more than what we typically think of in terms of urban city life. It meant really that people came together and had a shared vision of the common good. Most of us probably don't think about politics in that way, that politics is the search for the common good or the definition of a common good. But for the ancient Greeks, that was what politics was all about. That was the heart of politics and the defining component of politics. So I want you to think about politics as being the pursuit, being a search for or an attempt to realize a common good. Again, most of us probably don't have that conception. And so let me give you a second way in which to define politics that probably is a little bit more in line with your understanding about what politics is and how we typically use it in our society today. That definition, or that component of politics, is the pursuit of self-interest. Maybe you've heard of or used the terms office politics. And typically what's meant by that, of course, is that you are willing to do anything you need to do as an individual to move ahead in your business or in your office. And that can mean treating people really just as instruments, right? Everything is about you and getting your needs met. And so that's another way to think about politics, is that pursuit of self-interest. Another component of politics relates, again, just to the etymology of the word itself, the root of the word. And so police is a third component, and you kind of see how police is related to the term politics. And what the police do, of course, is enforce rules. So another component of politics is the enforcement of some common set of rules that the community has decided on. Of course, there are lots of different ways in which communities decide on what rules to enforce. That becomes another component of politics. So actually, with those 3 components in mind, you can come up with a pretty simple kind of definition of what politics is. And for me, I would just state it in the following way, but you can kind of splice it together however you wish. But you can define politics as an interaction between one's own self-interest and one's own sense of community and community identity within constraints imposed by the police. We all deal with community rules and norms that are enforced upon us. And that maybe we even have a hand in making those rules too. And that, again, is part of politics. That's that interaction with that community community identity, my own self-interest or your own self-interest, within rules that are already pre-existing. So hopefully that definition makes sense to you. But let me give you an example, if not. Because I would suggest that many of our situations, in fact, are political. This classroom is political in almost all respects. So just give that some thought. In what way does this classroom represent a shared understanding of the good? In what way does it represent pursuit of self-interest? And in what way is there a police force in play? I think most of us would tend to agree that at least in a classroom setting, there is a common good. And that common good is the pursuit, if you will, of truth. If I can be a little idealistic about it, but that's really the higher good in which we're all here, is to learn and to understand something about the world that maybe we didn't know before. So that's part of what education is. Part of the value of it is that common good that comes from people knowing a little bit more about the world. And yet, if you think about it, in fact, this is the answer I tend to get from students when we talk about what politics is and apply it to the classroom. Most students will say, well, the reason I'm here is to get a good grade and to get a degree. The degree helps me earn a higher income. So there's self-interest involved in all of that, right? There's self-interest involved in getting high grades. So notice that pursuit of self-interest, your want for a high grade, comes along with maybe also not wanting to assert a lot of effort. So the least amount of effort to get the highest grade, that often, if you're just thinking about education in that sense, it fits, right? That's just your pursuit of self-interest. But it doesn't really achieve the common good, which is learning. So there's that interaction between you want to learn, but yet you've got this self-interest too. Do I want to, instead of studying and reading my Marx and my Weber, would I rather watch the football game and take it easy and still maybe, cheat and get my way up to a high grade without actually having to do the work? So in a very narrow sense, self-interest, right, is just about the grade. But I think some of us pursue our self-interest or even define our self-interest within that larger community identity. So most of us, I'm hopeful, don't only have that instrumental view. And naturally, there's a police force that tries to make sure that you don't just pursue the self-interest. And that police force in this case would be me. And I will police the classroom and try to assess how well you've actually done the learning, as opposed to just going through the motions and pursuing your self-interest. So I hope that makes sense in terms of the politics that are involved, at least in the classroom, but you can apply it to virtually any situation, and I think you can see these three components of politics at play. All right, let's talk a little bit then about science, because political science does take a scientific approach, and all science involves a degree of simplification. There's a story of a king who wanted a map made, and the map maker went out and tried to make a pretty small map of the kingdom, and the king wasn't very satisfied because the map didn't have a lot of detail. And he wondered, well, where's the river that runs through my kingdom? So the map maker went back and he added more features to the map. And you can kind of guess maybe what happens to that map. It gets bigger, right? Because as you add more detail, more features, the map necessarily has to grow larger to accommodate that. And the idea here is that sometimes we do simplify things, right? Maps are meant to be simplifications. Science, in certain respects, is meant to be a simplification. And that's true when we're talking about a social science like political science. We're studying human beings, right? And we're trying to, in some ways, generalize and look for patterns of human behavior. But bear in mind that our generalizations are always just that. And you can come up with lots of different counterexamples, anomalies in the social sciences, and political science is no different. But in this class, I will be looking to share with you what I think are some generalizations that we can identify with respect to the political realm. I do want to point out that when you think about what science is, it's really simply the organized or systematic search for knowledge using the experimental method. That works great when you're working with the natural world, but it's a little bit more challenging when you're trying to study human beings, right? So I do want to just point out three ways in which the social sciences are different from the hard sciences, and that will give you at least some things to keep in mind when we're talking about political science, because it doesn't have real clear patterns that you can identify in an objective way. And so you always have to keep in mind that we're dealing in some ways with arguments in this class, but those arguments should be backed up by evidence and some fact. But even our facts are socially conditioned. Right? let me walk you through what I hope you understand about social science and the limitations of social science. So 3 key points here in terms of the challenges that we face as social science is in coming up with an explanation, a scientific explanation demonstrated through evidence in the experimental method about human behavior. First is that the subjects of social science, which is after all people, we're studying people and humans, they can actually react to the science itself, right? So you can study microbes in a petri dish and you can say, oh, those petries, or the microbes in there, you're oppressed. Be free because the scientist is oppressing you. Microbes don't pay attention to that, but human beings do. So when someone like Karl Marx analyzes human society, and he does so from a scientific perspective, people can react to that science. But if the science is meant to be a predictive and explanatory model of how humans behave, the science is actually changing the behavior. So I hope you kind of see what I have in mind there. Right. In addition, so the second point is that social scientists themselves come to the table as human beings, which means we have our own predispositions, our interpretations of things, and our own biases. So there's no such thing as kind of value-neutral social science. In a real philosophical way, there's probably no such thing as a value-neutral physical science either. But obviously this is much more of an issue or a challenge in the social sciences where we're studying human beings, and being a human being studying human beings, we're going to have our own conceptions as social scientists in terms of how we interpret events, how we define variables, and what we make of the outcomes of our analysis. So second, again, just to repeat it, is social scientists are really a part of what they analyze, and that affects the study. Last is that social science doesn't really allow for controlled, manipulated experiments, which is the hallmark of the scientific method, and the reason for that is partially ethical. It wouldn't be fair to put people in a petri dish, right, or put them in such a controlled environment where you want to just subject them to different variables and see how people behave differently. There have been some interesting studies, and we'll talk about them later on in the quarter, that psychologists have used, and they've been, I would argue, pretty unethical in terms of the way that they've treated humans in the study, and treated them essentially just as microbes in a petri dish, not thinking about the impact on the people that are being studied. So ethically, it's hard for us to do those controlled, manipulated experiments. There are, of course, some things that we can do, and psychology probably does about as much of that kind of research as any field in the social sciences. What we end up having to look at are the patterns of history. And, of course, the facts of history are always interpreted in a certain way through, as I said earlier, kind of our own lenses. But it makes it hard to come up with some overall generalizations that we can really have the same degree of scientific confidence in. So always bear that in mind. You can always kind of question the theories that I'm going to provide for you and the patterns that I'm going to suggest to you, that there are limitations to it all. All right, and now I am going to give you a little preview in terms of what we're going to be doing next week. I'm going to make a huge, vast, gross overgeneralization about the political universe. I'm going to suggest to you that we can divide it into just 2 parts. One type I'll call traditional politics, and the other type I'm going to call modern or industrial politics. And I'll start next week giving you some ideas about how we define those 2 kinds of politics. All right, have a good week, and again, or good weekend. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email or post something to the help board.